Hello, my name is Kyle Steele, and I'm a candidate for Norman City Council Ward 6 for the elections that are happening this February 2026. And this is a quick summary for what happened in the Finance Committee meeting today on October 16th. Essentially, this is like a fast facts version. It's only going to be a few minutes long. It's intended for those who don't want to watch the full hour of the Finance Committee meeting that happened today, but you could still know what happened and what was discussed in there. That way, if you do have any questions, comments, concerns, you can forward those to your appropriate member of the city council. That being said, I will provide timestamps in the description below for various parts of the video if you want to watch the more mundane aspects of it. As I said, this meeting itself lasted just over an hour. The first 30 minutes were centered around the possible creation of a trust involving the Parking and Transit Authority. The City of Norman, if you didn't know, has 5 trusts currently, and if approved, this would obviously be the 6th one. A lot of the mundane things were just the legal definitions of what a trust is and why it's appropriate to have one within the municipal government. But what it boils down to essentially is it's for like liability reasons, right? Like if you have a trust, that'll protect the city general fund financially if anything does happen regarding that trust where it does get sued or something like that. In 4 out of the 5 trusts that the Norman has right now, the city council acts as the trustees for that trust, and other city employees fill similar functions within those trusts, right? So the city manager would be the general manager of the trust. The city attorney would be the general counsel of the trust, et cetera, et cetera. As far as the parking authority is concerned, or the potential trust regarding it, a study on this was done in 2003. However, nothing happened with it at that time. Obviously, it's been looked at a few times over the decades, the most recent being in 2018. And while the specifics of what this trust will be will have to be worked out and decided on later, most likely it's going to revolve around construction, maintaining, and leasing out parking structures, multi-story parking structures. The trust, how it's going to be set up, is also an open question. There are a few ways you could set up the trust, but most likely it's going to be set up the way that the 80% of Norman trusts are currently, with the city councilors acting as trustees for that. The main source of revenue for this trust, if it ends up created, will be in the form of leasing parking spaces within these structures, either to private businesses or similar to like metered parking, where you're going to downtown and you decide to park in one of these and you pay your fee, and that'll go towards this trust as revenue. Currently, anything related to parking is handled through the city staff and the general fund for that, and that part of the city finances are running a deficit. Basically for the current fiscal year, the parking portion of the city fund has spent around $60K more than it's taken in. It's hoped that by forming this trust, that the statistics can be reversed and you can bring in more revenue than expenses, because this trust will be building parking structures, and now there'll be more parking spaces available, so you could rent out and lease more parking spaces and just encourage growth in general. Now, because it's a trust and for startup costs, the city would have to get a bond funded of some sort, and then the revenue that comes in from leasing these parking spaces would pay off that bond over time. And the terms of that bond would obviously depend at the time, on where the city gets its financing from if the trust is created. If the trust does go forward, they did say in the meeting that 2 potential sites have been identified where they would like to see the first parking structures located. However, many more can kind of be spun up as business needs dictate, essentially. It's not too terribly difficult to take an existing parking lot and turn it into a multi-story parking lot if needed. After this, what was discussed is an expansion of the guest room tax ordinance. So essentially, if you come visit Norman under normal circumstances and you stay in like a hotel or an Airbnb, you're going to pay a tax when you stay in the hotel. It's going to be kind of marked on the receipt there. However, that currently does not apply to RVs. So the current ordinance basically states if you're staying in a physical building, then you have to pay this guest tax. However, if you are driving your RV up here and then just parking your RV in like an RV lot somewhere, you may have to pay the business for that spot in the RV lot, but there's no tax that the city gets associated with that. So this was a proposal to essentially update the ordinance to say like, okay, if you're coming here with your RV for game day, essentially, short-term rentals, less than 30 days, you now have to pay the same tax rate on that to the city that the hotels and Airbnbs collect. As far as it concerns for Norman, there's currently 2 RV parks that this would mainly apply to, and there's like 321 spaces in these 2 RV parks, I believe. However, the kicker for this is for this ordinance to be modified, it would have to go to a public vote through the ballot initiative. And the most likely date for that is April 2026 if everything goes as expected. At the last little bit of this meeting, about 10 minutes or so, was spent discussing the monthly revenue and expenditure report, which I will link down in the description below for those who want to read the whole thing. But to sum that up real quick, basically the year-over-year sales tax revenue was basically dead even. There was no real significant change from last year to this year. However, there's a little bit of an asterisk there. If you look at the 5-year sales tax revenue, it's greatly gone up. So essentially, from like 2 to 3 years ago, it shot up significantly, and then it's been flat since then. So record revenue when looking at a 5-year period is how I would best phrase it. Now, the city of Norman is still currently running at a deficit because even though revenues have gone up, expenses have gone up as well. Imagine that. The city staff did say that they were aware of this and they're making an active effort to make sure that the city stays within the allocated budget for this fiscal year and doesn't overspend what it's been allocated to spend. There are some building projects on the horizon that are going to hopefully increase tax revenue, namely the Target that is being planned on built on the east side of town, southeast side of town. However, we as a city won't know the impact to the general fund that will have until that project is complete and they start recording sales. That was basically it for the meeting, and that concludes my summary. If you want to learn more about me or my campaign, just feel free to check out my website, KyleForNorman.com, also listed below, or you can just email me directly at KyleForNorman@gmail.com. Thank you.